Oh, hello, Mahipal. Nice to see you.
Hey Maya, good to see ya.
So it's very early in the morning, which I'm very grateful that you are also a morning person, so that we can do this at 6:30 in the morning. I wanted to do this podcast with you and talk about the Immersion Labs and also the event that you're going to be hosting in November, because even though you've done quite a few podcasts and interviews on the subject, I find I never get the answers that I want to have answered. And it's the same with most people that I'm interested in. There's very few people that seem to ask the questions that I want. So then I figured, well, if you're not getting what you want, why don't you just ask your own questions? So here we are. So very happy that you are willing to do this.
Thank you for having me.
We've known each other for about 7-8 years, I think.
Oh, way more than that.
Is it more than that? I can't remember. Anyway, a while. So within that time, I've seen your two main passions outside of your family traditions and your ancestry are travel and martial arts. Those are the, especially in nature, like exploration, going off on your own and exploring things, and martial arts. And it seems that there was a time during this span that we've known each other where you suddenly took on this mission of martial arts and sort of documenting and archiving as a project. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about and why you decided that was a thing that you wanted to take on?
Yeah, great question. So it's always been in the back of my mind, this thing about preserving the arts. I mean, as a kid, I remember growing up reading the works of guys like Don Drager, Robert W. Smith, Count Dante, and the whole nine yards. And it was like, hey, there's so much mystery and so much amazing thing. And then there's this call to adventure that comes, going off to a foreign land and, meeting a reclusive master and, becoming an apprentice to power, the way I think about it, and going on that journey. So as a part of this also, within some of the Indian traditions, what we have is the teacher would not let you record stuff. You wouldn't write down stuff. There weren't blackboards. They would draw things on the sand. And once the lesson was over, just like a mandala, it's erased. And I would be like, wait, what if I don't remember it? It says, tough luck. I mean, that's the English equivalent, right? Tough luck. Well, after many years, especially with some of the old Rajputana traditions, I've tried to get some of my teachers convinced, hey, we should archive this, Otherwise, it's going to be forgotten. You're going to have charlatans who come up and, they hijack your culture, they hijack your methods. And suddenly, like with a lot of things that happened with a lot of Indian traditions, just to find the source material, you have to go to either Germany or the United States.
And can we just clarify, how old is this tradition that you're talking about?
Geez, old. And the reason I'm hesitating to giving a date is because part of my work is being very precise about it. But 1,000 years would be very, 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 very conservative.
Okay, good.
Right. So anyway, where I was going with this is, in a conversation, he said, if you want to save my art, you got to save every art in the world. I'm like, what on earth are you talking about? He's like, look, we were forged in fire, so to speak. Being in the Northwest frontier, you fought everybody who came in. Going back to Alexander and his defeat in the Northwest. I know Westerners like to talk about it as his victory, but think about it. Who leaves a conquered land alone? 2, who goes back with a flag with the emblem of an elephant with your flag changed? It's time we rethink history properly. Anyway, that's a separate topic for another time. So starting with the Greeks, the Iranians, the Mongols, the Pashtuns, that was the way. That was the way into India. And this was the land that kind of fought it, right? So the arts developed in this crucible and forever kept changing, and they kept evolving. right? So he's like, okay, if you truly want to learn these fighting arts, you have to see the relationships that are formed in the clash and the relationships that happen in an asymmetrical warfare, right? Um, well, as you know, we've known each other for a long time. The idea of honor and, integrity is very high. That is still kept intact, but the tactics and the strategies change. So I said, okay, if you're going to do this, in order to get the old man to actually start recording stuff, I said, I'm going to go start doing this, right? So that was the beginning, but it was also a natural coming together of my other passions, whether it's traveling, whether it's learning esoteric stuff and preserving things. And those things all just came together, It's kind of like uh, the pull of an Indiana Jones heading off to an adventure, the pull of a nerdy librarian just collecting and putting these things together. And we said, hey, we have this new technology, we have means to do it, and nobody is taking the work that opened the doors to the east with, say, like Robert W. Smith or Drager and others. Why aren't we looking at other areas that have never been explored? Whether it's the Americas, India, the African countries. So that is what started this project.
So I have two ways I want to go with this. So my two questions are actually in completely different directions, because I know
Sure.
that some of your heroes are like Joseph Campbell, the sort of questing, and also Richard Burton and all the Victorian adventurers and all these people from way back that just went to go see the explorers. So I think that there's something interesting to talk about there. But then also maybe a good segue now is, why do you think strategy in war is such an enormous subject, which is studied around the world and has been for thousands and thousands of years? The art of war, all the old Indian manuals to the modern day, there's podcasts that put out of West Point, the army's still very, very interested in war and strategy. So why on a smaller scale do you think nobody really studies historical martial arts and smaller, cultural
I think it's hard
differences?
work. It's hard work. Number one, to start with, right? Number two, you have to learn to understand context and be able to question things, especially yourself. And number three, if while studying strategy, it's really a study of consequences. And what if this happens, then what happens? It's a study of consequences. And in our culture, we tend to live in the moment, and we're not really focused so much, I think, on consequences. So I think that has gotten the drop in the study of strategy, war strategy, right? If you talk to any martial artist, they'll say, of course I study strategy. They might have a copy of Sun Tzu, but I bet you most haven't gone beyond chapter 1, right? Leave alone actually take it in. So I think it comes down to, number one, that. Number two, I think strategy, the guys who truly do strategy are in the background. They're not there for the Facebook likes or to be noticed. In fact, they're almost gray. You won't know about them for a really, really long time, let alone how they think.
So do you think that at the top echelons of like the military, people actually are studying smaller scale material? Because for me, I'm curious. It's like I'm a student of strategy. I'm fascinated by strategy, always have been, tactics and strategy. And because it's a study of human behavior and human nature. And you see constantly some of the criticisms at a large scale of strategy are a misunderstanding of the culture that they're fighting.
Yes.
And I think that there's a great deal that you can find out about people on a cultural level by looking at how they fight and how they think, because it's almost a microcosm of their environment, to do with what weapons they use, what they have access to, how they think, what their taboos are, how they behave. You were talking about honor in your culture, for instance. You and I have disagreed quite greatly about that, in that the art I study is very much a guerrilla warfare art, right? Which is perhaps not as honorable as the art that you were thinking
They,
of
they, they,
in the
they're,
same
they're,
way, right?
yeah, their approaches. And I
Their
think,
approaches are different,
yes,
exactly.
yes,
But historically, there's reasons for all of these things. There's a reason
yes,
for why people are wearing what they're wearing, what they're targeting, how they
yes,
approach,
yes.
how they're fighting. Everything is contained within this. And so it would seem to me that this is a great blind spot, unless you're telling me that these high military strategists are actually studying these small scale martial arts and conflict.
I don't sit in the rooms with them, but the people that I've been exposed to, I believe they are,
Okay.
especially with the evolving fourth and fifth generation warfare that we're seeing, right? We're beginning to see where you're not fighting a state anymore in so many ways. You're fighting an ideology. And I'm just dumbing it down to the core level, right? You're fighting ideology. The rules have blurred. The warfare has gone from battlefield to urban centers, right?
Well, it's
So
cultural, right? You're fighting cultures because you can't
yeah,
take the
that's what I
culture
mean
out
by
of it. Yeah,
ideology,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So like the way I try to make sense of it, this is my personal model of doing this is, when we're studying an art or you're studying strategy, I say we're looking at three things, three G's, right? The first G is genetics. How they're built, what they do is going to govern how they move, how they think. Second, geography. The guys in sub-Sahara are going to fight a little different than the rainforests of Indonesia, right? And the third, I call your governing beliefs or your governing
Right.
cosmology, how you make sense of the world. A simple thing could be like, hey, do you believe in the afterlife and a Jannat or a heaven, or you don't, or a Valhalla, or you don't believe in an afterlife and this is all there is? It's going to dictate a lot of changes in how your tactics are formed and what you think of strategy and what is the impact of what we talked about, the consequences, right? And
Yes.
what is worth fighting for? That's
Right.
that's
And what
that
does
that's a
winning
big.
look like to you?
What does it look like to you?
Yeah, exactly. So, I think the study of martial arts on a small scale has been vastly overlooked personally. I like you say, and so that's why I guess I'm personally very interested in your project, in your mission to try and preserve all this stuff, because I don't know if you agree with me, but I do think a lot of the material is getting lost in some ways. Like what is manifesting in the modern day are offshoots, right, of these things, but that small scale warfare is harder and harder to find. Like there's a great deal of it that has become commercialized and become business that is taken away from the real fighting arts. And so, am I right in saying that you're still trying to find the real fighting arts
That's all I'm searching for, right?
that have a connection still, like to the,
Yes,
yeah.
have a connection to them, and these guys are hard to speak to. It takes years for me to open some of these doors, right? They're like, who's this Indian guy? Why does he want to talk about things that I don't talk about with anybody, right? Like one of my other co-investigators on a project, he was talking to me about what he was doing in Venezuela, and he was trying to learn garrote. And the guys would the funny thing he would tell me is like, hey, you can come home, eat with me, go date my sister, or take my daughter out on a date, but don't ask me about garrote. Yeah, it's that kind of thing, and it's funny, but it brings home a point as to how closely guarded this is, because the guys who have this knowledge, they don't want to be seen. They don't want to be noticed because they don't see this as a rice bowl strategy. They see this as a survival strategy, either for their bloodline or their ideology. And that is a very different rocket fuel than somebody who's like, okay, I got these few things, I package it in an X way or Y way, and suddenly now I have a generations old family art that I haven't taught anybody, and I'm going to make you my American representative. It's a slightly different rocket fuel. So I'm more interested in the former. There's no money there. If there's anything, there's heartbreak, there's a lot of loss of money, but very enduring friendships.
So, how is it that you uh, get these people to talk to you?
Just the way you and I talk, right? I'm just a pain in the ass until they give in.
Well, I
No,
guess
uh,
I,
I guess it was harder in the beginning
Yeah.
It was very hard in the beginning, right? But I think when they started to see that there were other keepers of traditions who were trusting this, and that I haven't really ever broken my word. I've not suddenly had the secret fighting arts being sold here or there, and it's truly being preserved, right? I think that helps build credibility over a period of time. And I think that's what's helped bring some very phenomenal people in one room, in one place at one time, So in that way, I'm blessed, And going back to our old feud about approaches, I really approached them like a Rajput. And that's what's opened those doors for me, I think. That's what's opened the doors for me.
So I think it's important to say that some of the information that you have been archiving, none of it's edited by you. You take what is given, and you have a great deal of respect if somebody says this is not public. You have to keep this as
I have Yes,
away.
I have at least three people who don't want any of it released until their kids die.
Right.
Yeah, it's not their death, but the kids' death. And I understand the reason, because they've sat down and they've talked about things that would make a lot of people squirm, A, right? And B, in some parts of the world, uh, feuds are not forgotten for generations. So you want to be careful with that. That's number one. Number two, I think they're also afraid of charlatans coming and hijacking their culture, hijacking what they're doing, or putting them in position where it just becomes fodder for controversy that helps the guy who's creating the controversy without giving the other party a role to play, number one. That is if they want to play. Some of them just want to be left alone. They're like, hey, just let me be, man. You know?
Yeah, I think for me, having studied with, the Filipino tradition with Sunny Umpad, I think there's two pulls that you see in these individuals, especially now in this generation. Sonny's teachers had all lived through World War II, so they were really doing whatever they were doing. And he too grew up in post-World War. He was born in 1948. So that whole era was still chaotic in the environment he grew up in. So he was still participating in whatever he was participating in. And so the tradition of that kind of art comes with it a sense that I can't show somebody what I'm doing because they might be a threat to me and I don't know them well enough, but also that on some level, I think you feel a responsibility to be part of a tradition and a lineage, and so it doesn't die, but maybe not. It's like I'm keeping this, and when I die, it's gone. But on the other hand, that it's going to be lost completely, so there's these two pulls, I think, and I felt it in Sunny, and that's my personal uh experience of this pull, in that he really wanted to share because he was very proud of his culture. He was very proud of what the Visayas had come up with as far as the richness of their arts and culture and everything. But on the other hand, he was still on the lookout for people that were going to come and challenge him. And so that sense of not wanting somebody to take it from you and turn it into something that it isn't, or misunderstanding, or perhaps being a threat because you've shown them your secrets, I think is a real barrier. But I do think also that there's that idea that this is going to be lost. Nobody's training hard enough. They don't need to. There's no reason for this material to survive in certain senses. Why learn swords if there's guns? Why learn, there's all those conversations about what's real and what's meaningful and what carries on, right? So those two pulls, I think, are part of that conversation.
No, I hear you. And I think, there's that generation that was forged in fire, so to speak. And you didn't really have too many choices, number one. And you didn't have too many resources. So you protected what you had. And one of those major resources was your ability to do things that most people won't do or are not capable of doing. That's A, right? And B, a lot of these guys have severe trust issues. I mean, you and I have talked privately about some of these things. They have severe trust issues. So trying to build that bridge with them is hard. And if you look at modern practitioners, compared to them, you and I live a life of utter luxury. You know, don't have to worry about electricity. Most of us don't have to worry about tomorrow's meal, right? So compared to them, we live lives of utter luxury, and being able to bridge that gap is hard. And most of them want to pass this down as oh, this is the only thing that I've had in my life, so this is the inheritance I have. I want to give it to my children or to my closest family members. And a sad and interesting thing that I've found is many of these children are not interested, because I think they see this as overwhelming passion in their parents, and it's like, oh, these arts took my dad away from me, or these arts took my mom away from me, so I don't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah, and the
Right?
necessity, I'm sure, is gone now. I mean,
Yes.
it has become esoteric to some
Yes.
level
Except
because
if you're in the third world or fourth world
yes,
countries in certain
yes,
places, yes. Yeah.
if you're still living it.
Yeah.
So talking of that, you've done various expeditions to places, and one of my understandings of, or from your stories, is that one of the ways that you get these guys to take you seriously is to participate. Like there's usually some
Always.
sort of like a hazing aspect to
Always.
to them going, who is this person and what do they want? I know a long time ago I was given some great advice. It's that if you go to a seminar with a teacher, don't sit down. If you want correction, don't ask questions, but do, like, show something, and then they'll come and correct you because you're participating, you're coming towards
Yes.
them and trying, as opposed to you just sitting there saying, feed me, feed me.
Yep.
So can you talk about some of those experiences?
Absolutely. It's also a way for them to feel you out, right? Whether you're for real or just another guy who wants that picture taken with them and, market themselves out. Uh, some people were really hard, really, really hard in how they felt me out. My initial first few months to Stockton, I was a taco delivery boy, like I joke about. You know, I drove in rush hour traffic just to eat tacos. It's like, what the hell does that have to do with this? Well, apparently it does. Trust issues. When I was in Philippines, we're in these jungles of Bacolod, and uh, going to look at this art called tapado, which is a long stick, and boy, can these guys generate power. So we ended up at the Grandmaster's house, the second generation Grandmaster, and then he has all his masters. That I'm like, okay, I have no idea how this is going to go. He comes with this big ass stick, gives it to me. It's like, okay, let's go.
So you
So
have to
I have,
stand up at that point,
you
and
do.
yeah.
Oh, well, who did I have there? Just Mangromi watching, Manoron watching, three, four other Filipino grandmasters, his entire family. No big deal. Just about 15, 15 guys, and he hit really, really hard, and my hands started to bleed. Both my hands were bleeding. And I did not give up until I couldn't hold the stick anymore. And the stick dropped. And I just saw him smile. And then his English wasn't that great, so he calls one of his guys and he says, "Yeah, I didn't expect him to stand." Uh, but then the whole relationship changed, right? And then I think they also want to see if there's arrogance, or do you come to them with humility, And I think that's a big part when they sense arrogance and you know you're now a martial art influencer, blah, 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 whatever, right? You kind of get doors put, you know? But when they see that you truly are interested in learning and you truly want to share and partake in it, the relationship changes.
Well, I've
And
told you
for some reason, there's always alcohol involved.
there's always
They,
alcohol involved.
yeah, it's lots of alcohol. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Oh, and not always. I mean, at Sunny's we didn't drink, but he had the same interview process, if you want to call that. I mean, that anybody that's read my book will know that if somebody new came, he wanted to know exactly who they were before he would teach them, and he set a few traps for them to fall into in that first session to really gauge if they had humility, if they had arrogance, how, and most of that was to do with how they lost.
Yes. I think it tells you everything about a person.
Yeah. So there's a cliche that you can find out, you know somebody, if you fight somebody, you're going to know them really well. Do you think that holds true?
To a large extent, I do believe so.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's
Because
to do with how
especially,
people lose
yeah, also how they win,
and
right?
how they win. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes, I think it tells you a lot, and where do they draw the lines? Like I've seen guys get into psychological warfare with guys where there is no line drawn, you know, the other man's wife, daughter, child. There are no boundaries. And then there are other cultures. The Italians, that would be a no-no. But the Indians, it would be a no-no. But even those things as to how you treat the other, how you treat the loser, and are you gloating in victory, right? I think it says a lot. So I think that cliche that you find out about somebody in conflict is true, because win or lose, they reveal themselves.
Yeah, no, I think it is actually true. Um, so that's some of the bigger picture of Immersion Labs. Immersion Labs also has you have publications and archives where you're collecting certain information that you are allowed to share, that you're putting together. That's part of it too. Can you talk a little bit about the archives themselves, and what you're putting in them, and what this sort of long-term plan with all this material, I mean all this
Yeah, so
information?
so far I think about 25, 26 arts, one or two here there,
And
we've
that's
actually,
worldwide, right?
yes,
Yes.
worldwide. So North America, Latin America, Europe, Asia, of course, and Australasia. So we haven't touched African arts yet deeply. So we sit down and there's a process called modeling. And so the process of modeling is you're modeling or taking in their physiology, how they move, what they do, right? It's a gross level. Then you're also looking at the psychology, what drives the engine, what's the engine behind the techniques, right? And then you're also looking at the belief structure and cosmology. And I
And
think
that
this part is not touched upon a lot, but that usually comes across in stories, in their rituals, and what they do, what they don't do. So what we are trying to do with the archives is get that whole picture. It's
and
not
that
just
comes out
about.
in the that comes out in the questions that you ask of them, or how does that appear, all those different levels?
So it usually starts at the gross level where you're just doing the physical stuff, right? And you're sitting down over lunches and dinners and drinks, and that's where some of these pieces come in. Once they understand that you're understanding the psychology and what's driving it, and that you're truly grokking it, and there is no judgment, then they get into the cosmology and the belief systems. And that's why the term immersion, right, as well, because it's about really going deep. So when you're doing expeditions and things like that, when you're locked together with them for 8 to 14 days, 24/7, and you've been to my things, when I say full day, I mean a full day, right? Start at 6 a.m. and it goes on at least till 10 p.m. And then, like at the Barbados expedition, we'd finish at 9:30, 10, but you'd have TJ, Obi, and Michael Ryan, and me, and Philip Ford sitting and talking until 2 a.m. on all the things that happened, right? So it really takes a lot out. And when you are sitting in so deeply with people around things that you're passionate about, and you see that the others are also equally passionate, something magical happens that would not normally happen even if you did 25 seminars with someone.
So we should clarify that too. It's like, even though that you instigated this project, this is a team effort. And so the skills of the team that come together to collate all this information,
All
are
I
they
am
all
is a glue.
martial artists, or
All I
what?
am is glue. So martial arts is a must, because if you don't understand martial arts or you're not passionate about it, it's not going to make sense. Of course, we also work with musicians and folks behind the camera, but we also have scholars, scholars who are ethnographers, who are anthropologists, who are linguists, and also professors of war strategy, right? Who come together, and then all these heads come together to say, okay, how do we see this? Because like let's say you and I are just sparring, right? You're going to see me from your cognitive biases, and I'm going to see you from my biases, and that's going to cause a lot of the reactions. But there's a third level that is happening too that we both may not be aware of. And somebody who is an outsider will see that bigger picture in a much better way. And sometimes if there are two or three of them from varying arts or varying disciplines, together they catch pieces that we both may not be aware of. Or if we are aware of, it's pushed so far behind that we don't even pay attention to it, right? But being able to capture that is part of the magic. That's number one. And number two, trying to get them to teach basics, right? Especially a highly skilled person. It reveals a lot, and you capture things that that you may not otherwise. It's easy to get them caught up in a very fancy disarm or a reversal, blah blah blah. But the real magic is in the basics. There's a reason it's the basics, because that is the thing that you'd work the longest on. That's something you start every class with, right? Just to take a simple example, is ukemi within the jiu-jitsu arts. You do that from the time you're a white belt to the time you're a grand poobah. You keep doing that. There's a reason for that.
Yeah, my Bagua teacher, Lord Shaw, he always said, it's all in the warm-ups. He's like, why do you think you do them every time?
Yeah.
That's actually the most important part of the system. If you keep doing this, that's how you get all the repetitions in. But if you call them the most important part of the system, they get weird. So watch out for the warm-ups, I guess, or the basics.
I think there's deep truth in that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think also I totally agree with you that participating is one view, and it's crucial, but also watching from the side is also absolutely crucial. I think you learn a great deal from watching the interaction,
yes,
as well as being part of the interaction.
Yes. That's why we do it as a team effort, and then always capturing it on 2 or more cameras from different angles. Because sometimes I go back and look at a film again, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Or, oh my God, I did that. How could I not remember that,
And that's why Sonny, my teacher, would video, because he said the whole curriculum's in these videos. He was very conscious that he wasn't teaching us, he was showing us what he did. That was how he phrased it. And your job was to go look. And it wasn't just to look at yourself, though that was a big part of it, but look at him and look at the interaction. And at different phases through your learning arc, you could go back and watch it and find out different things about it.
Yeah, and I would say there's a third reason we also do that is otherwise, I mean, or we go to learn with somebody or seminars, and you go with a notebook and a pen, and you're so busy you don't want to miss a word, you're failing to participate.
Yes. So yeah, one of the things that we would do as a group after any seminar that we did, because I have a group of martial art friends, was immediately in the lunch break or afterwards, we would all do the things that we had learnt with each other. So all of us who had remembered different parts of it, or maybe given a different variation, or heard something different from what was said, could combine, and we'd make a video of it with audio, like, oh, I thought you said this was important, and don't you remember this was a thing, and blah blah blah. So then that's the record.
Yeah.
So very similarly, it's a group effort.
Yes.
With video and participating.
Yeah, I just say I'm the dummy and the guy dumb enough to pick up a weapon and go into that context that I know nothing about, and you guys get the show.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. You have been to places as varied as Portugal and the Caribbean and all places in between, and have felt people. Should we talk about that?
Yes. Yeah, what about it?
I think as a student of human behavior myself, I do notice the individuality in people, and also kind of groupings of behaviors. So can you talk about the differences, or what you feel is similar in the warriors that you've met, or the people that really do things? Or is there a difference, or some people darker than other people, if you like?
50 shades of gray, right? So I think that's what it is. I think there's a spectrum, and um, to me it just comes down for me like one or two things, right? Number one, are they fighting for themselves or something far greater than themselves? And that makes a huge difference in terms of how dark they're willing to go, right? Two, is the focus on, to put it crassly, gladiatorship or warriorship, right? Yeah, are
So
you here,
spectacle, or
or the
solving a problem?
refinement of the person,
Mm.
right? Especially when you're not at war, right? And how do you do that, right? And then third, to put it, is your sword just something that takes lives, or can it also be a life-giving sword? And what is the role of both a pen and a mirror along with the sword? You know, just being a swordsman, interesting. You may have some really cool things, but if you don't have a mirror where you start becoming self-aware and what it is and what it does and what are the consequences of it, and don't have the discipline to write, that's why the pen, to actually crystallize what you're doing, to say this is an insight. Because ultimately, I mean, I think for me, when I read Sir Burton's statement that the history of mankind is the history of the sword, that's what it means to me. Because it's not just about chop this guy's head up in three pieces. Yeah, entertaining, and you keep the masses happy, like what you see with UFC these days, right? That's a far cry from the silent Purple Heart winner, who most of us have never heard of, and yet he made the greatest sacrifices and forever changed, perhaps even the history of the nation, in what he or she did. So I see that spectrum, and and that dictates a lot of things: the amount of trust they have, how welcoming they are or not. Are they trying to hustle you, or uh, you know, or is it truly a partaking, a communion of sorts, where both of you are left enriched? So I see that as the two ends of the spectrum, and everything falls in between.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we should go down this path. As a
But we
student
shall.
of the as a student of the sword, I'm
Yeah.
completely fascinated by their dual nature.
Yeah.
I think that there's some very ancient genetic memory that we all hold,
Yes.
because the sword, I think possibly before the handgun, was the first weapon invented to purely kill people.
Mm-hmm.
It was not invented for hunting. It was not invented for anything else. It's purely invented to kill people.
Yes.
And it has a real beauty to it and a real power to it. Obviously,
Yes.
throughout history, it's been a signal of power and
Yes.
prestige and magic, also because of
Yes.
this weird quality that it has, in that it is designed so well to take life in a way. Do you have anything particular you want to say about that?
I think it does. I think we have genetic memory. Definitely. I think that's why there's this attraction that certain people have to certain blades. And with the blade also goes an ethos of what it means to be a wielder of that blade, whether it's the Sosanpata of the Rajputs, whether it's the kukri of the Nepali Gurkha, or whether it is Excalibur. Each of these blades had across the world has an entire mythology around it. And then you look at some of the modern blades from Cape Flats to Tijuana, it has a whole different, it's so sharp, it takes lives and it draws people, And I think if you're not careful around blades and the magic it has and the generic memory it has, you'll find yourself in a cult, as you know well. And it's a topic we don't talk about much, but it has that power to draw. And when it draws you, you either learn to use it well or it uses you.
Yeah, it's there's so many fantasy books written about that. I'm sort of I think that there's some truth in a lot of, you know, science fiction and fantasy, or our stories, if you like, and our myths. But the sword appears very many times about as this very dualistic object that is very powerful, but it can take your soul. You know,
Yes,
that kind of
but
idea.
but you know, we've seen clicks, right? We've seen clicks where it's like this particular blade or this particular blade culture becomes very cultish, you know, and they may say it's a sword of God, this, that, whatever. It doesn't matter, but it's this very, or you're in or you're out. This is very tribal cultish mindset, you know. And I think, and I studied some of those too, but we have to be cognizant and self-aware as to what you're going into, because I think each of the blades move differently, right? And when they move differently, you use different motor skills, which means you activate different parts of your brain. And if you are in a very predatory system, you're basically just firing your reptilian brain. And what does the reptilian brain know? Eat or be eaten, right? If you don't balance that with the limbic brain and the emotions that come in, the ability to care, the ability to serve, or you bring your neocortex and movements related with that in and fire those synapses to say, hey, what is the consequences of this? What happens? What doesn't happen? You don't have that complete development. So I was telling a very well podcast about this off the record, not on recording. I said, hey, there's a reason you see these guys behave this way, these guys behave this way, these guys behave this way. No one person has the right answer, but the right answer is somewhere where, just like you want a whole brain development, you want a whole blade development. And I think what the blade does well, if you use it well, is to get rid of the superfluous and make sure there's harmony between all the three brains and your soul, so to speak. I mean, we are getting very esoteric, but I truly believe that, you know, I truly believe that.
Well, you know, Sonny also had light side and dark side material, one which he thought of as bringing danger and death to you, and one which was keeping it away, you know, in a very basic terms. So which I think is interesting. I think he had a real awareness of that. And he was very superstitious as a man. And I think everybody that deals with life and death is on some level. And he was also very particular about certain blades. So what do you think? I mean, just before we get off this subject, because I'm so interested in it, do you think certain blades have different feelings? Because I do. So there
I
you go.
believe that
I've admitted
100%.
it.
I believe that 100%. And I think blades also carry certain energy of the people using it and the genetic memory of the peoples who came up with that. So yes, I believe that to be completely true. I have seen people do things with blades that if I said it out loud on a podcast, I'll be called a liar. Uh, and I understand why people are superstitious and why I'm very careful about taking a live blade from somebody. So just
Yeah,
because I've
yeah.
seen things.
Yeah, and I do think that there's an interesting, I don't know, for people who don't know, there's a risk to buying a used blade, apparently, they say,
Mhm.
because of the history that it comes with. And I think if you get a sensitivity to it, and I do credit again my teacher for it, I never realized that swords could feel different from each other, or what felt good, if you like, and bad. But once you start to recognize that, you can feel differences of things you want to hold in your hand and things you don't. And it's not necessarily the things that you really want to hold in your hand that you should. But that there is a relationship. There is a
Yes.
relationship between, you know, this object that is created and you.
Yes.
And I think part of that's to do with it can injure you just as easily as it can injure someone else. And
Absolutely.
so you need to be in accord with the weapon. The weapon wants to protect you as much as, you know, you want to, you know, trust it. So there's a trust, there's a sort of a relationship, if you like, between the two of you.
Yes. I'll just say this one thing. Just one sec. Peanut Papa meeting, man. I'll just say this one thing. I think blades that have tasted blood are never satisfied after that, and they will seek to taste it again and again. And I know how ridiculous that might sound to some listeners, but I find that to be absolutely true. And you'll notice that certain blades always cut the people wielding it. And you'll hear some teachers say, be careful with that one. One always draws blood. Why? And then there are entire cultures, like even with the natives here, the indigenous Native Americans, where they did find such a blade, they would wrap it in red cloth and then a black cloth and then put it away.
Yeah, Sonny
Right?
had a kris that was given to him that he always kept tied up on his wall.
Yeah. Yeah, the moment it breathes, something happens. And that's why certain oils are used in certain cultures, and the knife, the blade is fed. And I've seen this. And again, I know it messed with my head. It messed with my head the first time I saw it. And I know how it sounds, but that's all I'm going to say on this. But it's real. It's true. Yeah.
Okay. Do you need to take a break? Are we good to keep carrying?
Yeah, we're good to go. We're good to go. That's constant chatter. You're hearing the spirits in the temple behind, guys.
Oh, okay, very good. Yeah, well, the last thing I'll say on swords is I felt very sad swords too, that I don't think necessarily something that's seen action is always dark. I think you can also get sadness in swords. And also there's ones that just are very alive, much more alive than others. It ruined me training with Sonny buying any sword off the internet or in a shop, because you can actually tell when you hold one if it's been designed for usage or if it's designed to look like a sword as opposed to being actually used as a sword. So anyway, maybe that's enough about swords unless you have something else to add.
I hear you.
All right. Anyway, so that's my obsession with swords. We can get over that. But I would note that the labs that are also part now of your whole bigger mission are often quite blade based. Not always. Not all the weapons are blade. Some of it's empty hand, some of it's stick and stuff. But it does seem central to your themes of these labs. So do you want to talk a little bit about why you put these events on, this big coming together of all these disparate people, and what you're trying to, what the purpose of that is as far as the archive and the exploration goes?
So it serves a bunch of purposes. The first one is it's to feel people out.
So right? The teachers, the ambassadors, as you call them.
To feel the ambassadors out and for the ambassadors to feel me out, right? It's a two-way street, right? It's kind of like a speed dating thing in some ways. Just putting it bluntly, right? Because who's this guy? I don't know him. His people talk great, but can he move? Right? And similarly, they are wondering, like, who's this guy? Is he just trying to steal my stuff? Right? So I think the first purpose is that. The second is to look, anyone who knows me knows I'm all about being comprehensive. So I think about a martial comprehensivist. That's how I think about it, whole brain, whole person, whole art, whole systems. So you get to learn a system by what it opposes, number one. You also get to know a system by something that is diametrically the opposite, like a sub-Saharan movement compared to an Indonesian rainforest movement, right? Sometimes when you see the stark opposites with similar length blades or similar sticks move completely differently, you wonder what the heck is going on. And that's when you begin to understand, like the 3Gs I spoke about, the genetics are different, the geography is different, the governing beliefs are different. But when you start seeing this, there is a possibility for the lights to go on in your head. Because so many of us who practice maybe some traditional arts or haven't figured out, hey, I had this really cool experience with my teacher, but I have no idea what the heck he was doing, because we don't have that history, right? And we're doing that movement, we're just doing it and it's empty. And then suddenly, one of these things, these movements you see, and it suddenly all makes sense, right? So what that does is it basically allows you to see the possibility of what is happening, what is not happening, and what could be the possible reasons for a particular set of movements. So that's the second piece. The third piece is also, the third piece is selfish, very selfish. I just want to learn all this and, have a construct within which I can get all of this in one place in one time. So that's a very selfish motive. And then the fourth, I think, is way more altruistic, which is I want to bring other connoisseurs who can appreciate this. My stuff is never going to be mainstream per se. It's not going to have 500 people outside lined up, nor do I want the 500 people, right? So it's about those guys who are interested in this, because what will be a well-lived martial art life if I can light this fire in 5 other people in my lifetime, and they take off and explore and do more things, and kind of make my work just something that they stood on and achieve far greater heights. So that's the idea behind it, and that becomes the foundation for much deeper work in certain areas, because it also exposes holes that I have in my thinking, holes that we have in this overall archival process. And then it also serves the other purpose of getting other people excited, and other martial art nerds saying, hey, you know what, I see what you're doing, I like what you're doing, but have you ever heard of this art? I'm like, what art? That's how I found Timothy, with Rongo Momo. I'd never even heard of Rongo Momo, and that's how it opened the door, and now he's a brother. So it creates some fascinating doorways. So that's the purpose behind the labs.
Right, because I think as this sort of team effort to go explore and create the archive, I think of the Immersion Labs also as this bringing together of these people who have a passion for martial arts,
yes,
and are looking to look a bit deeper, like context is everything, in so many ways, that they too, like you said, they sort of fill the gaps. How they see what's going on will influence your thinking about, what else is happening. Because I don't think any of us individually can fully, ask all the questions that need asking and stuff. I guess for me, what I think of is that you're almost creating these salons of interesting thinkers, and so it's like the participants are as important as the people teaching. Is that also to do with the fact that you get more out of the ambassadors if the students are engaged?
Of course.
Yeah. So
I mean, it takes one asshole to ruin everything, right? That's all it takes.
So I guess what I'm asking is that you do actually have an application process to come and be invited to these things. And is that the reason? I mean, I don't think I know of anybody else that has an application process to go to a seminar.
Yeah. So that's the reason. And it's also to get the point very clear that I don't care that, hey, you're not buying entertainment. It's not something that, oh, you paid X amount, so you get to do whatever the hell you want. You're not a customer, right? That's not how I do things. Let's make sure it's the right match, because these are very highly skilled people and playing with some very strange objects, right? And the last thing that I want is hell to break out because of egos. So in some ways, I'm inviting them into my home, because I put a lot online in doing this. It's not made a penny for me. I've lost money on them all, right? And I put a lot online on this. So if I'm inviting you in, and I treat you like family when you're there, and you know that, Maija, you've been to a couple of them. I treat you like family when you're there, and I want to make sure that I want to invite you into my house, right? Wouldn't you be careful who you invite into your house for dinner? This is way more intimate than dinner. So I just want to make sure that, hey, maybe I'm not the right match for you. So let me disqualify myself from you, your perceived payment, and everything else, right? And this truly is an opportunity, because I assure you, most people won't be able to open those doors for you. So,
as
and
far
there's
as the
not
range of teachers that's going to be there in this.
the range of teachers, and some of the teachers who decide to teach. Some of them don't teach anywhere else. Right. So, and that is because of a deep trust that was built over many, many years. And just because I want to sell one more ticket and bring that one guy in to diffuse my cost, is it worth winning that over? No.
Well, they've always been very successful, I think. I think it's always an interesting vibe when you get multiple serious martial artists in one room. I'm talking now of the ambassadors more than necessarily the students, because there's this sort of prowling that goes on.
Yeah.
But usually by the end of the weekend, everybody, the sideline discussions to me are always the most interesting, because on a big level, when people really do feel that they are in a comfortable space to share their art, and people are enthusiastic and participatory, and it's not like it can be when you teach, that it's that then it does open those doors to discussion, and you can ask the questions directly of these people and have really good conversations, or listen in to two other high level people talking to each other about how they're explaining and talking and what's happening on the sidelines. So, I do think they're really very worthy events, and I've enjoyed my participation in all of them, though they are incredibly hard work. As far as the amount of hours that they run. So if we look back, the first one you did was Legacy of the Blade was the first one.
Correct.
Is that right? So I was at that one. And then you did Stigmata was the second one. And then the third one was Born of Blood. And then it was
the Spanish influence, Holy Blood, Holy Blade.
Yeah. And then this last one, which is Shock and Awe.
Speed. Yeah.
So there was a theme to each one of these. How did you come up with the theme, and how did you what was it you were trying to get with the compare and contrast model that you've been talking about with these separate kind of themes, if you like?
Yeah, and no, great question. What's the logic behind the perceived madness in some ways?
Yes, exactly.
It's my own personal curiosities and questions that have arisen, right? So the thing was, wanted to have something that unifies and still celebrates the diversity. So Legacy of the Blade was all around the blades with that, the first foray into, let's look at the world of blades, everything from South Africa to Philippines to, Japanese to blah, 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 right? The second was around sticks. So the first two were around weapons, two of the most common weapons, edged and blunt, impact.
Yeah.
The third one is, like you and I both have a deep relationship with Southeast Asian arts. So he said, hey, let's look at, these borders were very porous. Why is it that Tagalog has 1/6 Indian words, 1/6 of the language? I mean, for God's sake, the word teacher is in Indonesia and Philippines is guru. So like, what is this thread that ties from India all the way to the islands down to New Zealand? That was the third thing. Let's see if linguistically, culturally, in terms of movement, things come together, right? So that was that. And the fourth one was, as a part of studying Southeast Asian arts, you cannot miss the influence of the Spanish. And in the Filipino arts, this is the Streza, this is that. You get fed up with hearing about it, right? Like just recently, 2 days ago, I got into an argument with a Serrada master who claims to have the lineage back to 1300s to Catholic priests in Spain. And I called him on it. I said, I'll go with you, but why don't you tell me 2 generations of your teachers' teachers, just 20th century, right? Let's not get to the 13th century. And boom, suddenly it goes silent. But the point is, Spain was the first global empire. They conquered the world with the edge of the blade. So we said, hey, let's look at the Spanish influence, all the way from Philippines to the New World. So that was the theme that tied it together. Now I'm looking at speed. But again, it goes to the pieces where you look at the genetics, you look at the geography, some areas with geography, right? The tools that go with it. And then you look at the governing mindset, the governing beliefs, and things like speed, the so-called attributes, they shape your mind, they shape your mindset. So that's what we are studying now. So the geography gives us the politics, the tools gives us the movement metaphors, right? And the particular skill development or attribute development gives you very unique insight into how people think about things. And what better way than speed, right? Because if you look at speed, the fact that I have 13 different segments of it on the same idea of speed and timing, and how each culture sees that particular skill set and has developed it in a very unique way, right? Just to make it really dumb, right? Like with the Chinese art, the ability to listen to energy before you respond. It's highly refined, right? And within the Indonesian arts, getting yourself in the right position where you take away the opponent's reach, take away their options, and you increase yours, the so-called positional speed. How do you get into that position in an elegant way, right?
So I have a bone to pick with you.
Of course.
One that speed tells you things about people. I don't know what you just said, but you're just like, so speed tells you about things. I was like, does it though? And also just the use of the term, because speed, I don't think there's really speed as a separate subject from from timing and understanding distance. It's not about being fast.
Yes.
It's about there's perception of like there's it's like
I get it.
Being first is an idea, right? But it encompasses so much more. So why did you choose the word speed?
Yeah, I mean, if I said distance, how many people would you listen? And timing is also more refined. And like you said, they're actually really one thing. So what is the hook that gets me to get people to explore all of it? Speed.
Well, people are obsessed with speed, and I'm curious why you think that is.
I think because they don't make good distinctions. And this includes me when I was 17. Right? I just thought I didn't know the difference between speed and velocity and quickness. And it never occurred to me that that is related to distance. Right?
Well, I do think that, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Carry on.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
My personal feeling, and I agree with you, that everybody wants to be the fastest and has been obsessed with it forever, ever since, Asian martial arts came to America and probably before that. And I suspect it's something to do with sport and being first, running fast, doing something the longest, being ahead. We all want to be the first, the person in the front, because that's the winner. And somehow speed is related to that. But I think that it's a sport context and not a fighting context, because there are definitely, if I can get there first,
I would take an
I know, I want to disagree with you. I want you to disagree with me. So there's preemptive striking. Is that speed? I don't know. What do you say?
So ultimately, if I was to sum it up in one word, it would all come down to timing, right? Like I like to say, you could have an AR-15 and miss me by 6 inches, and I have a kitchen knife and I go 6 inches deep, right? And so does just pure speed win? No, not if your aim sucks, not if your distance control is not good, not if you're timing the strike correctly. So I think speed is a interesting doorway to begin this exploration.
So it's like saying Spain. It was taking that as a theme of like the world arts, and now you're taking speed as a word to encompass all these other things.
To encompass all the pieces. So everything from the ability to listen quickly, right? Because when we think about speed, hardly anyone thinks about listening energy and listening speed, right? Hardly anyone, except maybe esoteric Chinese martial arts. But it's an important part, because if I can't perceive fast enough, where's my reaction?
Well, I think many people struggle with the when of things.
Correct.
And so it seems that maybe that's what you might be getting at, is the when. It's like if you don't know the
Yes.
when of something, it's like you haven't perceived when something starts, perhaps, or what?
Go ahead.
No,
No,
no.
I agree with you. And it's also speed is not one thing, right? It has many different aspects to it. Everything from initiation speed to finishing speed. Just taking it very broadly, right? But you're only going to be as fast as the weakest link in that chain, number one. So just pursuing speed for speed's sake, hopefully you'll understand the folly of it, right? And then you understand that, hey, what's really matters is distance and time management, right? But even if I just took distance and time management, what would matter there is what's the speed that I'm moving at.
Well,
Because
the
for me to manage,
efficiency of the movement,
correct.
understanding a clear path,
Yep. Yep.
all those things.
So I mean, I could be very esoteric about this and say this is the geometry of space and time.
Yes, of course, that would suit me perfectly.
I know, but I would have a grand total of two people there, you and me. Uh, so I think the goal, one of the goals of the labs is also for us to get to question our assumptions, the
Sure.
things that we take as holy truths, and say, okay, let's look at it. And how's that worked out for you? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. I think recycle speed is very important. How do you
Hmm.
get from, thing X to thing, the next one, A and B, A to B
Yeah.
is very important. And so I'm not saying that the speed itself is
I didn't take it
unimportant.
that way, but I understand what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah. It's just it seems to be less descriptive, but I guess I see what you mean now. So as a sort of a gateway.
Yeah, I struggled with it, but this is the most common gateway to get into the more esoteric stuff. And you know, people are drawn to it for some reason. You want Lamborghinis that can go 200 miles an hour when the speed limit is 40 miles an hour in the mountains.
It's fast. It's fun to go fast. Yes. I mean, I rode a motorcycle for many years, so I understand.
Yeah.
But I do think it's about being first, because I think everybody does want to win. I think we're a very competitive race and nobody wants to lose, do they? So I think being first has connotations of speed. So maybe that's why it's
I guess
accessible.
so. I've never understood what is the pull for it. I was fascinated. I still am fascinated. I'm still doing this, right? Uh, but it's to me it's a gateway, a doorway, and to also see how speed is perceived differently across different cultures. The longer the memory they have, the more subtle and refined it is. So
Right.
you and as opposed to newer cultures where it's just brashness, right? It's kind of like the speed that a teenager has and the speed, say, a much more mature person has, and how they think about things.
Well, I think that's just because when you get older, you get slower. And so you have to start to get more treacherous and sneakier
Yeah,
and see speed in a slightly different way. So I think
yeah.
that's just a natural evolution of your martial art
But
career.
I would also argue that your speed of perception and your speed of decision making has increased, right?
Correct.
In order
Yes.
to compensate for the decline in physical speed, whereas early on, what you're generally working on is physical speed.
Maybe I would also say that you don't need speed because you're better at setting people up. So you're not even actually perceiving in the same sense that you're
I hear
creating.
you. I hear
Yes.
you.
So,
I
well,
hear you.
my viewpoint on these things.
No,
Um,
I hear you.
but you called this first, this next seminar as shock and awe. And I guess that is possibly the clue to it not just being about speed.
No, because it's about overwhelming the other while maintaining composure, right?
Ah,
Right. So how do you do that? So the first is there are physical pieces. The second is there are mental pieces as well, like truly the art of setups, the art of strategy. How do you take care of your neurophysiology and your neurobiology? Things like, hey, I don't want to have an amygdala hijack. What good is me being able to go really fast, but if I have an amygdala hijack and my foveal vision is gone and I'm locked in, right? That's a dangerous place to be. So the second part of the shock and awe is both self-management and management of context, the battleground that we find ourselves in, right? And then the third piece of shock and awe is, for the lack of a better term, war magic, and magic is things that we may not understand today, technology or insights that are so far ahead of the common martial artist view that it's indistinguishable from magic, right? So it's about shocking the opponent and standing in awe of the results that you get, right?
So, I would
And it
put them.
also borrows from the military idea of overwhelming speed and force, just the decimating the opponent.
So I would put them all on personally, put them all under the idea of creating surprise, because you're shocked because you didn't see it coming. It seemed fast because you weren't expecting it, or you were expecting something completely different and something else happens. And I think that all those, including war magic, come under those headings. Now, actually, let's clarify, because when you say the three parts, you're saying that this is only the first of three
Shock and awe one,
immersion
shock and awe two,
labs.
yeah, shock and awe one, shock and two, shock and awe three, yeah.
Right. So this subject, and I suspect it has, I'm not sure if this is true, but you can tell me, it is all to do with your studies of the OODA loop and more deeper stuff about brain perception.
Yeah,
Also,
it'll go into
is this
that
true?
in part two, yes.
Yeah.
And also then bring it back into the geographical and cultural ideas on how they perceive speed or timing, right? I'll use the word timing, how certain cultures work on different times of timing, why they specialize in that, and what it tells us about them as a people and culture.
All right. So again, I would use, if I put surprise in there, that would work for me too. It's like, how do you surprise certain people over other people? What is surprising? What do they see? What don't they see?
Yeah.
Because I've been fighting for a long time that everybody doesn't, is obsessed with non-telegraphing motions in martial arts. It's like, if you don't telegraph, they won't see it coming, which is
I want them
definitely
to see.
part of it. Yeah. But the other part is I'm showing you something that is completely a complete fabrication. So while you're looking over there, I'm going to
Yeah.
sneak in the back door. And I think
Yeah.
both of those areas, I think, are very interesting fields of
Yes.
study.
Yeah. And with the OODA loop, right? It's again three pieces, right? I want to have the cleanest OODA loop, and I want to disrupt your OODA loop as much as possible. So perception of self, perception of the other, and the interactions and permutations and combinations in real time. What happens when we clash?
Right.
Right.
And yeah, and just to obviously say, for anybody that doesn't know what the OODA loop is, it is a concept that was created by John Boyd, who was a fighter pilot during the Korean War era. And it is observe, orient, decide, act were the three or the four different categories that he came up with, that the brain takes basically that create a perception action gap. So there's this arc, these things that the brain does. I think there are a great many misperceptions about what it means, that everybody's just like act, and that's what it means. So that's where you should be. But everything is relational. So in a sense, it is an interlinking of the yours and theirs and the thing that's happening.
Yeah, I think people leave the relationship piece out most, and to the quality of decisions they make. That's the piece that gets least studied in some ways.
Right, because I think the action beats reaction is obviously totally true, but I don't know if there's any thing that can't be a reaction to the moment that happened before. Like, we all live in time. Time is moving forward. So the only reason why I'm doing something is because of the previous moment in time.
My favorite come back to action beats reaction is, how do you like jazz?
Yes. And so maybe that's a good metaphor, is that, playing jazz. It might be an interesting thing. So yeah, I mean, it's a massive subject, right? So I'm interested that you're putting them in these three groupings.
I think this is just the beginning. I see the first three pieces as the beginning. People think that this is the magnum opus. No, this is the beginning of the thesis, right? This is the beginning of the thesis to explore things like sacred geometry, things like timing, things like, how do you bend space and time, if you will. If I want to sound really intelligent, that's what I'd say. How do I bend space and time and make it make it work for me.
I could be
But
facetious and say gravity, but I won't.
gravity, yeah, I hear you.
But I think that it's also worth saying that like a lot of the sacred geometry, if you look at the Spanish sword fighting manuals, there's a bunch of esoteric diagrams and things like that. They're really useful when you already know what you're doing. So part of it is the knowledge itself and how that culture sees it, but then there's how do you teach somebody that doesn't understand it? Like there's
Because
two different routes.
they're two different. I mean, this is not for somebody like I told you, I had this young kid who wants to become an Olympic champion wanting to come to this, and I said, no, this is not the place for you, right? Because I think rightly it is kind of a graduate course. It is kind of if you're going to learn sacred geometry, know a little bit about geometry first. Know the tools, what a protractor is, know what a divider is, and then we can start playing with it, because then it also ties in with architecture, right? And I'll say, what are you talking about? I'm like, look at a military culture. Okay, they have straight lines. The capital is always in the center. Whether the capital is a political building or a church is in the center of the city, and you have these straight lines going from the center everywhere out. What's the reason for it? You wanted armies to be able to march in and out, right? Look at tribal cultures. You'll never find straight roads because they meander like the river, because it was more about this patch of land that needs to be tilled, and then I create pathways, right? So even just looking at what's in the center of the city, the state of the streets and how they're formed tells you a lot about not just the kind of culture that you find yourself in, but also the fighting metaphors. You find yourselves in regions like Tondo or interior Tivana, narrow streets, right? Suddenly, what do you think is going to work there? Do you think a Kampilan's going to come out? No, it's going to be a shut blade. There's going to be sneakiness. And the urban warfare is going to be about how do I shank you and get into some building before one of your buddies see me, because there are so many people. I need to be sneaky and not be seen, because if I'm seen, I'm marked.
It reminds me of my family's from Finland, and it reminds me of my grandfather. Both of my grandfathers lived through World War II, and the Finns' animosity towards the Russians, I'm sure. And after the war, the Finns came to an agreement with the Russians, basically to avoid getting reinvaded, because the Finns were on the losing side against the Russians, basically, and they didn't want Stalin to take it. So they came up with an economic program where they would cooperate with Russia, and so Russia left them alone. And my grandfather was incensed at this, and he was like, every economic program of us trading with Russia means that we're building roads from west to east, and all of these can be used as landing strips when they invade.
Yep.
So exactly the same kind of idea.
Or what the Chinese Silk Road is today, with what's been happening, so-called an economic corridor or the string of pearls. Really? Guys don't study history long enough. Yes.
Yeah, but if you look at like Iron Age, like hill forts, there's always ditches and there's a way in, and there's like Spanish towns that have the circuit. Yeah. There's a lot of those old medieval towns that are designed very specifically.
Yes.
For
so
siege
so I think the sacred geometry, what you're manipulating there is how you interact with the environment and your relationship with space and time. It's going to change your weapon choices. It's going to change what you can do and how you move. And therefore
that's your tactics and strategy.
Yes. So this particular lab is just the opening to get into architecture, to get into how they organize their mind, how they move, and all of that.
Oh, well, I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating. Okay, so we've already talked for almost an hour and a half. Perhaps that's long enough.
Sure.
So I'm looking forward to this event. I actually going to be there teaching the Sangot.
Should be fun. Should be a lot of fun.
Should be a lot of fun. Absolutely. And I appreciate the work you're doing. I think you're completely crazy for trying to archive all these arts, but I think the world will appreciate the work that you and your team are putting into this, because I am personally very sad that so much of this amazing rich culture of fighting arts is being lost, or the meaning is being lost, that the context is being lost, like all the things that make the art the fighting art. and not the business are slowly going just because of lack of need. You know, it's like there's no need for it, so of course it's going to die or evolve because the reasons why you're doing it are changing.
Yeah, and I think there will come back a time where it'll awaken again, maybe in a different way. But I think, that genetic memory is never forgotten. But it's a lot richer. It's a lot richer world when we can find some passions that truly bring us alive and has nothing to do with paying your bills. Sometimes, I look, I have bills and I would like my bills paid too. But I think at the same time, when you're doing something just for the love of things, something else happens. And I know there are plenty of other guys like this out there. Hopefully what the foundation does is it becomes that table where more of them can come together and say, okay, hey, let's preserve this, let's keep this going and make this library. We don't know who's going to check things out. Maybe somebody won't even touch that particular book for 300 years. But when they do, it opens a world of wonders.
Yeah, and I think it's a massive insight, like I said, into the human condition. There's nothing like an adversary to make you realize who you are and why you exist and what you do and all those things. So I think that is part of the human condition, is that we are all relative to each other. We don't exist as islands. And I think it's the conflict is the ultimate relationship in a way, the ultimate adversarial relationship. So I'm sort of happy that you're doing what you're doing, and I don't know, the patience of a saint dealing with all of this, but I wish you luck with
insanity, as you said.
It's one or the other, right? Yeah. All right. Well, cool. Thanks so much for your time. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think you would like to say, or that it spurred you that you want to share?
Just one quick thing. I'll say, hey, there are quite a few guys who are teaching in public for the very first time, or this openly, and with some this might be the last chance you get to see these things. So don't sit on it. And I don't repeat things, meaning I'm not going to go on a city to city tour replicating this. It's too much work, and then it gets boring, and then takes the fun and passion out. So this won't happen again, and I mean it, because I have about 12, 13 different labs already kind of forming and framing up, and so that's going to take me into the next 12 years. So jump on it. Don't say, I'll wait for the next time, or I'll wait for a video product to come out. I have nothing to sell you. Okay, so
it's the experience.
Yes, it's selling. The experience. So just come and act on it now, and you may not get to see good Bowie again. You may not get to see Sangat again. You may not get to see a first generation Bruce Lee student show what true speed is. I mean, it's phenomenal the way Pat moves. Or see an actual headmaster of Lua who's in his mid 80s show what mature speed is, or see the machete from the jungles of Colombia. You're not going to see Grima. So it's just touching the surface of the things to come. And most importantly, all these guys are in one room. Okay,
talking to each other, sharing skills, all the cool stuff.
It's the price of entry is worth just hanging out with these people, honestly.
It's true. All right, so cool. Thanks so much, and we'll talk again soon.
It was a pleasure.